Iran. An update on the war, the energy crisis, and potential buying opportunities. All this and more in this episode number 21 of my investment series, where I invest 1,000 euros every week. But before we get into the news of the week, let's make the trade. So we are here with the MSCI emerging markets. We have 1,000 euros that we're planning to invest. Let's review the order. Looks good. And order placed. Boom. That should have worked. Look at the portfolio, and there we are. We are at 20,750 euros. Now we're actually lifetime down a little bit. I invested 21,000, and so now we're entering the phase where I'm actually down. I was up more than 1,000 euros at some point already, but as you know, the crisis hit us all. But as I always say, a crisis is also an opportunity to potentially buy. Now, let's look at what happened in the markets. As you can see here, markets mostly in the red. The MSCI World, the MSCI Emerging Markets all went down, and now both of them are also down year to date. In the 1 month period, you can see that the MSCI World is down almost 8% and the Emerging Markets ETF is down almost 12%, so hit even harder. And what's the reason of all this? Of course, the war in Iran. Now, I'll give you a little bit of a war update, and then we talk about the economic consequences. So it's really all revolving around this Strait of Hormuz, where somewhere between 20 and 25% of the world's global oil exports have to pass through. And Iran is in a strategically very good position to block or at least obstruct the traffic through the strait. And that's why Trump has pushed hard to have the strait open. And he's given multiple ultimatums. So here this article in Yahoo Finance mentions 4 previous Hormuz ultimatums from Trump and how he always backpedaled. Now, since the negotiations that are going on, or not going on, we don't know, are not really yielding any results, the Pentagon prepares for a massive final blow, which means actually ground invasion or huge bombing campaigns. Iran, on the other hand, says there's a surprise for US troops if ground invasion begins. That's of course quite obvious. If you're defending your territory, you're always in an easier position. You can hunker down, you can lure the opposing forces into an ambush, and so Iran has quite a difficult terrain to navigate. And even as the US armed forces are much stronger, they will suffer. It's going to cost financially, and it will cost soldiers' lives. And as a result, the political price is super high, maybe prohibitively expensive. And so that's the situation where we're in right now. But what's the consequence? The consequence is, of course, happening in the energy markets, especially in the oil markets. Here you can see the oil price, how it has developed over the last couple of months. And you can see here that end of last year, we were down at almost $55, right around there. And now the price shot up to almost $100. And that is, of course, a disaster. In fact, analysts have called this the biggest oil shock in history, even bigger than the 1970s energy crisis. And this has real economic consequences. As they mention in this article, a 10% rise in oil prices might reduce global economic growth by 0.1 to 0.2%, while a 30 to 40% rise in prices, like we're seeing right now, could cut a full 1% of global growth. Okay, but we're not even looking at 30 to 40%. To me, this looks more like 80%. So that's a disaster. But it might not even be the end of it. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink warns of oil prices as high as $150, which would lead to a global recession. And he says oil prices could reach $150 a barrel if Iran remains a threat even after the war ends. And so that's very interesting. Even if the war ends today, if it doesn't end with the Iranian leadership being ousted, Iran could still hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, and then we might be looking at years of above $100, closer to $150 per barrel of oil. So that means Trump might not even be able to negotiate his way out of the war. If a ground invasion is the only way to get the Iranian leadership out, then it looks like the increasingly unavoidable consequence. Meanwhile, we might be looking at another 1970s style oil crisis. Back then we had supply disruptions, high prices, nervous markets, much like today. And ultimately, economies plunged into stagflation, which means high inflation combined with low economic growth or even a recession. That's exactly what we might be looking at right now. And I follow this one guy on LinkedIn super randomly. He doesn't have a big following, but he posted some interesting stuff, a former McKinsey partner. And he said 1 year ago that we are here, right? Compared to the 1970s inflation crisis, where there was a first inflation shock. And he said we're in exactly the same position. Earlier this decade, with COVID and the Ukraine war, we already had a big inflation spike, and this leveled off. But he said, if you think that's it, you're wrong. So now the inflation might be coming back even harder. And what he said a year ago now seems increasingly likely, which makes him look almost like a prophet right now. And what that means is that we might be looking at a crisis that isn't just blowing over like many of the past crises in recent memory, but one that lasts a couple of years. Which also means now might be a good time to invest. And this guy also mentions that Warren Buffett made a lot of money in the 1970s because he had some cash ready and invested when everyone was panicking. And so that's why I think now might be the best time to invest. When we look at the indices here, there's definitely a discount and a buying opportunity. So the bottom line here is the S&P 500. And when we look at that, we can see it's down about 8% from the all-time high. So definitely already a buying opportunity. And when we look at the top line, this is the MSCI Emerging Markets, the one that I'm investing in this series. And here we can see we're down about 12%. So now it's becoming increasingly attractive. And if you have the balls, now might be the time to invest. But all that is easier said than done. I know the news is scary right now. So yeah, that's I think what I leave you with. We don't know what happens, but I would just encourage everyone to keep an eye out and be smart about their money and investments. So yeah, that's it for the week. I hope to see you next time when I'm going to make a trade again and also talk about what happens in the markets. Till then, take care and all the best.